My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students from the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. The midterm elections this year, starting with this June's New York primaries, carry even greater meaning and involve greater turmoil than usual. We have a mayor testing his political chops, a governor facing re-election wrestling with a legislature with ideological disputes threatening to fracture Democratic majorities, and a presidential administration that continues to test whether our democratic norms can withstand an unrelenting assault and their continuing relevance. We're joined by three New Yorkers who take part in or observe our sometimes circus-like politics to assess where we are and where we might be going. Nicole Gelinas is with the Manhattan Institute, who writes for the Times, the City Journal, and whoever else is lucky enough to get to publish her. Keith Wright is his former state Democratic Party chair and assemblyman from Harlem, and my former assemblyman at that, who now serves as chair of the Manhattan Democratic Party. And Harry Siegel is the editor at thecity.nyc, which if you don't follow it regularly, you should, and he will tell us what it all means. Nicole, let me start with you. This is as we tape this, the city, the mayor and the city council speaker agreed to delay proposing a final city budget. They're now a month delayed in finalizing a budget in Albany. This is not shocking news, but is it a sign of disarray, or is it just it's new times and people trying to work things through? What's going on?
Well, it's certainly a sign of disarray, both at the state and the local level, where the city charter requires the mayor to submit his executive budget proposal to the city council by May 1st. Obviously, May 1st is Friday. And without a state budget, without knowing how much revenue the city is going to get from the state budget, in other words, would be very difficult to put together a city budget. So it's not concerning that the council and the mayor have agreed to delay that deadline by nearly 2 weeks until May 12th, and they did that today. What's more concerning is, A, how late the state budget is. As you said, it's going on a month late, and it's really over disputes over issues that don't belong in the state budget. The governor has proposed some reforms to auto insurance. She's proposed...
but very often they do stick non-fiscal items in the budget.
This is a habit that really started under Cuomo, and it's not a good habit.
Under Andrew Cuomo.
Yes. If you want to pass a law, have a hearing, debate it, let it pass or fail on the merits. But constantly holding up the state budget and holding the budget hostage to pretty important policies that should be decided on their own is not a good idea. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that the rhetoric is that the city is in a fiscal crisis. You heard the mayor say this morning, this is the greatest fiscal crisis since the Great Recession nearly 2 decades ago. That's just not correct. Tax revenues are going up. There's no dispute that tax revenues are going up. The economy is still growing, at least for now. Obviously, there's a lot of national and global turmoil, but for the moment, city's economy is growing, tax revenues are coming up. The issue is the city wants to spend more money. They want to grow spending more than the tax revenues are naturally growing. And so this is an issue of not making decisions on spending. It's really not an issue of the economy crashing, at least not yet, and we just don't have enough money to keep up existing spending.
Keith, you spent a lot of time in Albany, as well as down here, wrestling with precisely how these kinds of issues get worked through. And is this unusual? Is it a cause of concern?
It's not unusual. Certainly, I spent 24 years in the New York State Legislature, and I remember having late budgets, I guess, probably 20 out of the 24 years. We had some historic battles with George Pataki. We had, I remember...
Republican governor.
Yeah, Republican governor. I remember we we probably didn't get a budget until October or November of one year, and we weren't getting paid at all. The legislature was not
But
getting
you were
paid.
going to get back pay once
We were
you
going to get
settled
back
with
pay,
it.
so it was a forced savings program in a lot of ways, which is, of course, what I needed. But so I'm not that concerned. But I think what we have here is you have a brand new mayor who kind of probably wants to get it right. And he and they just don't know what their revenues will be from the state. Now you also have two elected officials. They say politics makes strange bedfellows. You have two elected officials that need each other.
The governor and the
The
mayor.
governor and the mayor. And they're both still feeling each other out. Yes, the mayor was a member of the legislature, but he was not really in a policy-making position. But they need each other, so they're feeling each other out. Yes, there is a growing concern, if you will, I guess, in not knowing what the revenues will be from the state. In the city, I think budget gap is what is it, $5 billion, $5 billion, and the pied-à-terre tax, although it's getting a lot of headlines, is not really. It's a drop in the bucket in terms of
I think it's half a
$500
billion
million.
Yes.
So you still got a lot of money to make up for it. Now, all of that money cannot come from the state because the governor's. I think she already gave $1.5 billion to the city already. So they're just both filling each other up. But am I concerned about the late budget in Albany? No, I'm not. Am I concerned about the pushing back of the budget in the city of New York? No, I am not. The streets will still be cleaned. People will still be going to school. The police will still be streets. The hospitals will still be open. So I'm not concerned. But that's what we need the budget for in order to pay for the city of New York and the state of New York to keep moving forward.
Harry, fortunately, it's political season all the time, which has kept us in business for a long part of our careers. And you do have a governor who has been pretty clear that while she's empathetic to the mayor, supportive, I don't know if she's supportive of the mayor, but she's not coming across with an increase in the billionaire's tax, increase in the income tax, the pied-à-terre tax, which is a tax on apartments where people, apartments above a certain $1 billion level where people are not living in them, is, $500 million is $500 million, but it's really symbolic more than it is terribly meaningful. Is politics distorting it? Is it driving it?
I mean, always. So Mamdani ran on a bunch of promises that just in the simplest terms, he has no way of delivering. And it's the extension of a flywheel that started when he was at 0% in the polls, and he starts getting some momentum, and it's like, what have you done? He hadn't done much. He sort of was involved. He was involved in the creation of a pilot program for free buses. There was nothing like free buses everywhere. He's offering huge things. And he says, well, how do you know I can do any of this? Well, I had this one pilot program for 1 year that got into the budget. And look how great my campaign is. And now it's how can you deliver on all these things you've promised, almost all of which need to go through Albany or involve Albany's money. So the Margaret Thatcher line that he just quoted at his 100-day rally to dunk on about the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. His bet is he hasn't run out yet. And Hochul has given him $1.5 billion, keep cool. And that wasn't enough. Pressure was building. She came around on this pied-à-terre tax. Mamdani spiked the football, did like a triumph. We got this thing. Video, we don't know what the tax is. We don't know which apartments it's actually going to apply to. Like, he's saying it's $500 million. There was a real study a few years ago that says probably closer to 200 million. It's very complicated because our property tax system is so screwed up. After Mamdani won, the whole time, we can have everything. We can have more. Things can be nicer.
The market value of an
And the
apartment
assessed
has
value.
nothing to do with the assessed value of the apartment.
And it goes to, if we need the property tax system to be reformed, but you have to look at it as a whole system. So saying you want the tax structured in a way that encourages properties to be occupied. You either occupy the property, rent it out, or you sell it. That's fine, but not just doing that one thing all by itself and ignoring the rest of the system.
But he needs to do that one thing by itself so he can announce before there's a budget that would actually have this thing happen, before anyone knows what it means, to say, look, tax the rich promise fulfilled. And he's frantically trying to do this promise by promise. He needs to extract as much money from Albany as he can in this cycle. He can't figure out his budget without knowing where that ends up. It really is a sign of disarray and dysfunction that we're this far in, we're coming up on the city's deadline, and we're not there. But his bigger theory of the case, to bring us to the midterms, is he has a lot of political capital to spend, much as Bill de Blasio did when he ran on, we'll have a tax hike on the rich, it'll be like a cup of coffee a week, and for that we can have universal pre-K. And he got some money, and he got universal pre-K, and didn't get the tax hike. Mamdani's in the same position. He has this 1 year to cash in. He has a mandate, then the governor's on the ballot, and then she'll have one to try to get what he can. But he thinks he can extend this by challenging all of these Democratic regulars with candidates he's very thoughtfully, I think, and carefully endorsing who to challenge, who not to. There was a council member who wanted to challenge Hakeem Jeffries. He said no.
Right.
And then he said, I'm going to do it anyways. And Mamdani had to show up at the DSA meeting and personally, on Zoom and say, please don't do that. And then they barely agreed not to. So what he wants is to show, hey, Brad Lander can crush Dan Goldman. Probably correct. He's got a few of these candidates.
I'm not sure it's correct, but go ahead.
We'll see. I'm pretty sure, just from the nature of the district and some other things. Nydia Velasquez is retiring. She's, a long-serving, sort of iconic figure. She wanted to pick her successor. She tried negotiating. The Times reported privately at the mayor about who it would be. They didn't agree, and then he ambushed her. Surprise, here's my candidate in the race, who now has significant momentum, tons of small fundraising. And
his candidate is Claire Valdez, and Velasquez is supporting
he's not on the ballot.
Is supporting the Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Yeah,
and there's a third candidate in that race.
Indeed, it's a very interesting race.
Right.
So Mamdani is not on the ballot. Most of these seats are very safely Democratic. What happens in November is irrelevant, right? But if his DSA folks can knock off more Democratic regulars in these primaries, and they're knocking on doors, they're bringing in small dollars, they have momentum. He says, look, my movement is that much bigger, somebody else's money, Albany needs to deliver. His negotiations, however those are with Trump, they need to deliver. And he's trying to extend his political capital and the size of his movement right now.
His political capital is really what this is about. And we've been talking about the mayor. Is he overbetting his political capital?
I think so. I think so. Well, listen, people voted for Mamdani. They didn't necessarily vote for the DSA.
They also voted against Cuomo.
I was going to get to that.
Right.
They voted against Cuomo.
Right.
And I think the mayor was lucky that he had Andrew Cuomo as an opponent. He was very lucky.
I agree with that.
So he was very, very lucky and very fortunate. And the city rallied behind him. But I think also that they're running candidates throughout the city. I don't know whether or not they have, for example, in Harlem, I think the DSA may have 200 members. I'm sure it's more out in Queens, I'm sure it's more out in Brooklyn, but they're running candidates, DSA, of course they have the fever because the mayor won and you have everybody now popping up, I'm going to be DSA. But I think they have overplayed it. I don't think they were strategic in terms of where they were going to run races.
Is there a if in fact his candidates do not win, a significant number do not win, is there a political price he will pay?
Well, there always is when you don't back the winner. there always is, no matter who you are. Listen, I've paid my political price because sometimes believe it or not, I haven't always backed the winner. And hell, I've paid some political prices just for running. You know what I mean? So there's always a political price. What that is, I don't know. But I think he's riding high right now,
but he
as
also
is the DSA. But I don't think they were strategic. I think they were more emotional, for want of a better word.
Well, it's a movement.
It's a movement. It's a movement.
Right.
And so I think they were just trying to, I guess, play the field as much as they were able to play it.
But you got the governor, who is who's in her election year. I mean, it's an existential crisis for her in the sense that she's up for re-election. And she's trying to kind of maneuver this to kind of keep things relatively calm? I mean, how do you look at how the governor is handling all this politics?
Well, I think she's doing a good job, although like with anything in politics, that can change at any moment, in that you're always fighting the last election. So 4 years ago, during a time of, well, it was the year coming out of COVID, really, 2022, a time of perception and reality of rising crime and disorder in New York City, where subways...
The bail reform issue was the dominant issue.
Yes, and we had a 53% increase in the number of homicides in New York City between 2019 and 2021, which was a big deal politically. This is why Eric Adams was elected on the Law and Order platform as mayor in the fall of 2021. Subway crime, we went from 1 or 2 homicides annually on the subways for 20-odd years, going to regularly having close to a dozen homicides a year on the subway. So the governor came pretty close to losing to a Trumpite Republican in New York State, which was not expected, and that pushed her more to the middle. And she already was kind of naturally more in the middle on crime and law and order, but that really kept her there. So she sees a challenge from the left, but she also sees, I need to make sure I'm okay in the general election, that I'm okay on the right. Even in a year where Trump is not so popular, you would think the tide would be going in her favor, and that way she's concerned that that could kind of come out of nowhere again later in the year. So in her head, she's fighting 2022 at the same time. What does she have to think about in terms of a challenge from the left? Well, she has no primary fight. No one came up to challenge her from the left. The worst that could happen is some of these DSA people just stay home and don't vote, or if they want to, I guess they can vote for the Republicans. So she doesn't face much of a credible challenge from the left. She's thinking more about the center and the right, which kind of explains why she's doing what she's doing. She's not really giving Mamdani the tax hikes that he asked for. She's giving him a little bit of a compromise on the second home investment tax. She might give him a little bit more than that, but it's nowhere near the $9 billion in annual new taxes that he asked for during the campaign. And he'll be happy with that as long as he gets something that can say, as Harry said, that he increased taxes on the rich.
And this is after Mamdani and the DSA played a role in pushing out the challenger, her former lieutenant governor, who she did have on the left. She's still looking at the state and holding that line. And Mamdani has not shown up, although he is certainly not discouraged, like, the tax the rich rallies and with the chanters, because they all understand that the power and the money lie in Albany, that the state, the electorate is different than the city. And while Mamdani has all this momentum on his side, real political momentum that's serious, that is not the same as bending political or economic reality entirely in his direction.
It's also, the behemoth in the White House. In the 2022 election, which was a midterm election, as this year's elections are, the country swept to the Democratic side, except in New York.
Yes.
And where we lost, we meaning Democrats, lost several congressional seats. And it was largely I believe, on the crime perception, on the bail reform proposals going too far. My analysis was always that the analysis was that policing is done in a racist way, and I think that that's correct. But it's also the fact that communities of color are disproportionately the victims of crime, and that's not somehow that couldn't come into that wasn't factored in as strongly as it was. Now Bruce Blakeman, who is the Nassau executive running for governor on the Republican side, who I believe is, no matter what he says, is not a Trumper. He's got to be a Trumper. I mean, Trump is draped around his neck, and how that plays out, Trump is draped around Mike Lawler's neck in a congressional district in the Hudson Valley. Trump distorts this, but Trump distorted it in 22, and there wasn't
See,
and
I
Democrats suffered
disagree
here.
with you, Bob, because they are Trumpers. I mean, they're elected officials. They have minds of their own. They could either disavow or disagree. But the moment you disagree with this guy, he automatically runs candidates against you. So they are Trumpers. I mean, deep down inside their soul, maybe they aren't, and maybe they're just they're transactional. They may feel they have to agree with them on any and everything, but they are. I mean, they are who they are. They are who they say they are.
Well, right.
Look at Lee
That's the other
Zeldin.
thing.
Lee Zeldin.
Look at what
I
they say.
served with the guy, and he was cool. He was all right. We used to have discussions, but he's a Trumper. He's a Trumper. Lawler. No matter, I mean, he may vote a different way every once in a while, but he's a Trumper. Who's the other guy you mentioned? I forget who you just mentioned. Lawler and
Lee Zeldin, his other signature issue was like let's fire Al Bragg. Al Bragg had just won an election. He hadn't done anything. It was the most Trumper, anti-democratic position. And Zeldin's a very sensible, straightforward guy, and he made his choice.
Nice guy.
Blakeman is pro-choice. Blakeman is a pro-choice Republican.
Yeah.
But that's just like both you said about Mamdani and personality, and he was lucky in his opponents, and he just had charisma. Zeldin had a certain authenticity and a certain, he was likable, he seemed natural, he didn't seem like he was twisting himself into pretzels, and so swing voters kind of forgave him that, okay, he has to stand with Trump, but we kind of like the guy. I think Blakeman doesn't have as much to run on in terms of personality, and so that also helps the governor. You know, you kind of either have it or you don't, and Zeldin is just closer to having it than Blakeman is.
What is at stake for the city in the, going beyond the June primary and the fact that we're all talking about all this money that we want to have coming from Albany? We used to get a lot of money from Washington. What's at stake for us in the midterm elections?
If Kathy Hochul loses, which seems very unlikely now, but it could happen, Lee Zeldin gave her a serious scare. As Nicole was saying, all bets are off. Andrew Cuomo, remember him? He liked to talk about how, the city is a creature of the state and I control everything. Lee Zeldin, as I mentioned, when he was running, it was, I'm going to fire the first black Manhattan district attorney like months after he won election. It was absurd. The Post didn't notice him until after the election, then started crusading. That was part of the law and order thing. So if somehow Blakeman wins, what a mayor can do, Mamdani right now is trying to get more out of Hochul. He's going to be in an incredibly different position. Obviously, a governor needs New York City as the economic engine to be successful, but it will be intense and brutal, and I don't think anyone's thinking about that right now. And there's all this Mamdani momentum, and people are intoxicated by the possibilities. And Cuomo was just so miserable and exhausting. That adds to that. But there's an off but real chance that happens, and it would be a severe shock to the city, and at a moment where I think Mamdani's exaggerating greatly for his political crusade, but we're not in great fiscal condition.
Mamdani could outflank Blakeman by going to his buddy Trump. This is still the weirdest bromance.
And certainly your question was what's at stake. I mean, I'm just telling you, if we don't find a balance of power in Washington, D.C., let's say if the Democrats take over Congress, and it still is very razor thin.
Even if they just take the House.
If they just take the House, I think it creates a balance of power, if you will, to a certain extent, which will otherwise, because Trump is just running willy-nilly over the Republicans in the House.
He's also running willy-nilly over the Constitution and over the
that's
separation
true.
of powers.
So I'm saying, let's say the Democrats take over the House, and that creates more of a balance, I think, and New York City will have a better chance. But if they don't take the House,
we'll have a speaker.
And plus we'll have a speaker. So that helps out an awful lot in New York City, in New York State. That helps out. But if it doesn't happen, then God be with us.
So when we look at, what do you think is at stake? Is there a possibility, when I grew up in Linden houses in East New York, a housing project. And when I came back to New York City to be a reporter for New York Newsday, the late lamented New York Newsday. In 1987, I realized it was the 30th anniversary of when we moved into our housing project in East New York. I was 8 years old.
1957.
And there were 15,000 NYCHA units alone opened with federal support. By the time you get to the Reagan years, literally, this is just NYCHA, there were 500 NYCHA units a year. So, and it's never recovered. And, we're in a horrendous housing crunch. New York's a wonderful place to live if you can afford a roof over your head. And there's no likelihood of significant federal assistance.
Well, I would take a step back and say, what has the fact that federal leadership in the House and in the Senate, that has been concentrated in New York State and New York City for 2.5 decades now, but it hasn't really done anything for us. All it got is a decade and a half of politics being dominated by Trump. So I think the frustration with Senator Schumer,
In particular.
with Speaker Jeffries, even with people like AOC who seem more interested in building up their own brand than getting any law passed or building a coalition to actually get something done in Congress, that all this achieved is New York elected officials and their supporters and their appointees and their staffers are just in this political bubble where they didn't realize, Senator Schumer in particular should have realized, when you've got the national perception that the border is completely uncontrolled under Joe Biden, that is going to be catastrophic for the 2024 election. But nothing apparent that Schumer at all was able to do anything to try to get that border picture back, and the perception of that picture back under control. So, you kind of have to ask, what have they done for me lately? What have Senator Schumer and Speaker Jeffries actually done to help New Yorkers?
He's not Speaker anymore.
And
Right.
it would be Speaker Jeffrey.
Right.
And do we need a party where the leadership base is somewhere where politics are actually normal, in a swing state or in a place where you actually have a couple of Republicans making their position, so that the Democrats here can at least have some idea of what swing voters in swing states are actually talking about? So we've got, the Democratic Party is in terrific shape in New York, but they are the mechanism, along with California, in just continually losing to Trump.
But in the time of hyper-partisanship, people, the Democratic Party polls are almost lower than the Republican Party, but the anti-Trump feeling is so much astronomically stronger than the anti-Democratic feeling. It's who are you against, not who are you for.
After he was situated to be mayor, Mamdani played a role as a favor to the Working Families Party, whose preferred candidate initially, Brad Lander, had eventually accepted he wasn't going to win and used his matching funds as Cuomo was spending obscene amounts of outside money to attack Mamdani. All these other candidates used public funds to kamikaze Cuomo. And to pay that back, Mamdani privately indicated that he really did not want to have on the ballot a proposal for nonpartisan elections. That's in the weeds, but I bring it up because what Nicole was saying, which I think is really smart and right on, we need to have politics that are actually decided in elections. Instead, we have state legislatures that are frantically redistricting and saying, look, we changed 4 seats. The voters don't even have a say. We're going to have 4 more Democrats here, 4 more Republicans there. It's obscene. And the only challenges that matter, and in New York it's almost entirely with Democrats, are within the Democratic Party. And that's like an unhealthy and stupid politics in which the map can converge from the territory because most people's opinions and votes don't matter. Really, Mamdani, who I like and I'm hopeful for in other ways, one of the things I'm furious about with him was his decision to do that, which I think is known but has not been widely reported on because he didn't have to formally do it. If he's watching, I invite him to give me a call and tell him if I'm getting any of this wrong, but I do not believe so. And if we do not have a politics where most people's votes count, things get crazier and more intense. There's no need to compromise. The Democrats have leaned so heavily on Trump when they thought he was the interregnum. and not Obama and Biden, that it's like, whatever, we can really push things forward past what people actually want, because the other option is so dreadful. And that is a terrible way to do politics, maintain a coalition, or have any cohesion.
You know, I mean, this whole redistricting fight starting in Texas and going, rolling across, it's a classic case of politicians picking their voters as opposed to voters picking their.
What did we do when we were
politicians.
kids? What did we do when we were kids? When you get in a fight and the teacher would try and break you up, you would say, he started it, right? He started it. Trump started it.
Yes.
Down in Texas. So you have to defend yourself, right? So
Yeah, but Harry's
Virginia,
point is that everybody loses in this fight.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm not saying that they don't. But that's so other states and they have to defend themselves. Trump first started it in Texas, and then California started reacting, and then some other state got
Missouri,
in Missouri
and
and North Carolina, and then Virginia came up, and with the Virginia win, that really is, we have to turn the tide the other way, right?
I did like,
so
by the
Jeffries
way-
will say, well, we didn't start it, but we'll finish it.
I did like the fact that there was a proposal from one Republican congressperson after the Virginia redistricting win for Democrats. Apparently, the Washington suburbs used to be part of Washington, D.C., and because Washington, D.C. was a square, and they were given to Virginia at some point in the 1850s, and now they want them given back to Washington, D.C., because that's where all the Democrats in Virginia
I see. So that's where we are. I mean, who wins? I mean, we'll see. I mean, but certainly nobody seems to be winning now.
But, part of this also is, I believe that the president is mentally unstable. I believe that the president is emotionally unstable. And I think that
You got no argument out of me.
there's this legitimate question about whether the 25th Amendment, which would allow the cabinet to remove the president, should be invoked. That's the unprecedented nature of this thing.
I like democracy. I'm recognizing that very few Republicans and very few Democrats are that fundamentally concerned with it. People sell ads against it. They try to win office by saying that this is the process that matters. If they win, they say it's a great process. I sincerely like it. And so the 25th Amendment worries me. The redistricting worries me, even though he did start it. At a certain point, you either want to have elections or not. Not everything can be, they broke the glass first, so we need to shatter the glass now, or we don't have anything left.
Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
Hi, Earl Johnson, Borough of Manhattan Community College, studying human services right now. So I had a question related to, I think, some of what you guys were talking about with how Mamdani campaigned and like a lot of the promises that he made. So we kind of see on multiple levels, on the national level, on the state level, on the city level, most of us are sort of very highly concerned with affordability. And so I'm wondering, I know that we talk about this idea that like socialism is great until like you run out of other people's money. And so I was thinking about, how about the fact that most of our citizens that are dealing with these affordability issues are working class citizens that are paying into their benefits and not really able to see any of that return. And I think that that's what some of those promises and things were.
I think one of the things that thank you. I think one of the things Mamdani has kind of, he's not the first one to do it, but he did it most loudly, is to put affordability at the center of a political agenda that goes way beyond New York City. I mean, the president is talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. The governor is talking about it in terms of her auto insurance proposal, though, I wonder who it's affordable for, since, how do you, and it also raises the question of socialism. I mean, when I grew up, I've said this before in the show, when I grew up, socialism was a class-based, it was working class people. And the main supporters of the DSA, Claire Valdez, who was the DSA candidate running for Nydia Velasquez's seat, posted her target zip codes on her website. And they were all the gentrified, mostly white, college kids who can't find good jobs, can't afford to live here. these socialists are kind of the vanguard without the proletariat. So it's but it's real. I mean, they can't afford to live in this city.
Real quick, Earl, that was a great question. I think you got it a lot. There's a lot of gentrified candidates who are supposed to be the avatars for working class movement and whatever. I think that critique is vastly overstated and not utterly compelling in that these issues intersect. So you have people, you have people come to New York and find themselves living in East New York now because that's where they can afford the rent.
I grew up in East New York.
I know. These are the circles. The same problems that people who have been there for decades are discovering in some common cause. And some of the newcomers who have credentials and education and want to do something and are vastly underemployed end up as people who are running to start with. But this is intersecting with real concerns people have. And look, I think the bottom line is you have to have affordability. If everyone feels squeezed, no system holds up. Democracy, any form of self-governance. If people don't feel like they can make ends meet and pressure is growing, and if they feel like they're not doing as well as the previous generation, and we're a couple generations into that in the country now, and
But
in the
isn't
city,
that
those pressures building.
precisely the kind of attitude that drove Trumpism?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This populism is everywhere, and the question is who can actually demonstrate that they can provide affordability and live up to some of these vast promises against tremendously challenging, like weird world circumstances, huge population shifts, AI, like totally disrupted supply chains, things that are way outside my pay grade. But whoever can demonstrate to the satisfaction of voters, as long as we have elections, that they're making it better.
The mayor was absolutely correct when he brought this issue up. And for a long time, he was the only one bringing it up. And then everyone else was riding the bandwagon. He was absolutely correct. Listen, and I don't care what your income level is. I paid $7.49 for a gallon of gas on 145th Street. That's a lot of money. And I don't care who you are. I mean, I see it in Harlem. White folks, I've always contended, the white folks ain't coming to Harlem because they like black people so much.
Because they're
coming up because they're getting priced out of the Upper East Side, they're getting priced out of Gramercy Park, they're getting priced out of wherever. So they want to stay in Manhattan. So let me go live next to some black folks, next to the projects. It's okay. They're not sending their kids to the schools. I'm just saying. But they want to live, they want to find some place that's more affordable than where they were, right?
Well,
so
right.
Madami brought up the issue, all right, that no one had been talking about for a long time. And it's absolutely true. And it hits all income levels. I don't care who you are.
Yeah, but it's
and
also,
he did it masterfully.
But the question is, you can agree that the issue is real and the issues. Then, of course, is what do you do about it? I mean, how?
Well, that's another story, but at least he brought it up.
Right, right.
Listen, in politics, I mean, you're running for office, you want somebody that's going to speak to your issues, speak to the things that concern you.
I mean, arguably, Trump spoke to that issue and is governed exactly the opposite of everything.
Right, and Trump ain't talking your language in your neighborhood. I don't know if he's talking your language he might be talking your language, I don't know. But I'm just saying, he ain't talking my language in my neighborhood. Listen, I went to my kids used to want me to take them to wrestling, what's it, WWF or WWE or whatever. And I went and I got popcorn thrown on me. and then the next week after that, I was in Albany, next week after that, Trump shows up. This was his crowd. This was his crowd. But no one had been speaking to them before. And he energized that crowd. And it depends on who you talk to. And he's riding that wave right now.
Yeah, I think with affordability, in New York City, there's housing and there's everything else.
I agree.
We've been, this is not to say it's not a real complaint. It is a real complaint, but we've been complaining about the cost of housing in New York City since 1626. Housing in New York City is not going to get cheap absent a major crisis that collapses demand, which we saw in 2020 and 2021. The rents on the market rate apartments went down significantly because newcomers to the city and people without strong ties to the city basically fled the city in 2020 and 2021. That's a demand crisis, opened up supply, but we're back to normal. People of all incomes from all over the world want to come live in New York City at every single price point, $1,500 a month, $25,000 a month. There is somebody for that market. So that's been perennial. Candidates have campaigned on housing for as long as I've been paying attention in New York City politics. Every candidate says they're going to build more housing, they're going to keep the rent down. De Blasio froze the rent for 2 years. It was the everything else that Mamdani kind of seized on, and that happened because of inflation. In 2021, the flood of federal stimulus money from COVID helped in the bottlenecks in the supply chains, made inflation cross over that 10% line for the first time since the late 1970s. So people seeing eggs, you're actually paying attention to the price of eggs, milk, gas, electricity, all of these things that they took for granted. The rent may be too damn high, but at least I can afford a dozen eggs. Suddenly you can't afford a dozen eggs, or you're noticing that the subway fare is really cutting into my weekly budget. That's what Mamdani really seized on with the free buses, with the government-run grocery stores. And that's, no one in New York City had really talked about this issue and the cost of those things. And that's what got him over the top. Even though his policies for these things, fare-free buses, it spoke to people because it's concrete and it's easy. You may not be able to solve everything else, but if I get on the bus for free, that helps. And so it's a little bit populist and a little bit Trumpish in that way.
Yes, ma'am. Your name and your campus, please.
Hi, my name is Chelsea, and I'm from Lehman College. So my question is, I kind of just want to pick on your brains a little bit. So you mentioned that Mamdani won mostly also because of his opposition, how weak it was. But I also think his campaign was highly due to, he won highly due to socialist campaigns and how available he was to the community. And my question is, do you think the governor, seeming that elections are approaching, do you think the governor is going to come down to Mamdani's level, and actually are they going to negotiate more and work better together?
Right.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No. So Mamdani was an incredibly active and energetic campaigner, and he had energy and a sense of those connections, and he had not so weak, like Andrew Cuomo had been, nearly a three-term governor, second generation, was a powerful figure within the Democratic Party. I don't want to overstate that, but the way this race played out with the best possible breakthrough points for him, and he ran through the rope in a way that's pretty exceptional. And anytime someone does that, the consultants come out and they say, we're going to make 25 new Mamdanis. And it turns out these things are very hard to just make a kit for. But the DSA energy and their ability to get enthusiasm, people door knocking, doing the functions that the parties used to perform, was really remarkable. And that started with Tiffany Caban running for district attorney in Queens, where people sort of laughed at her, like this decarceral.
It started with AOC, actually. It's not as a DSA candidate, but as a left candidate.
Mm-hmm. Democratic socialist who's going to become district attorney, to end this morally obscene system. And on election day, she won. There was a recount. She barely lost. And I think the establishment and the party leader there sort of shrugged and like, well, that was really close, like onward. And, it turns out that momentum was building. I'm curious if with the 200 members, maybe it's building in Harlem now, and maybe the point is to win elections if they can, but if not, to build a thing that's going to keep going and keep pushing. And I feel some of that happening.
But your question was also about, I guess to a degree the question is, does Mamdani have an upper hand in dealing with Hochul? I'm interpreting, but that seems to be kind of when she says, coming down to Mamdani. Is she coming to Mamdani, or is because she holds the cards? It seems to me budgetarily.
He has the upper hand as long as he understands his limitations. That he's not going to get the $9 billion in tax increases that he asked for. So take what you get and declare that a victory, and your voters will be happy. So he's a very smart politician and a good campaigner, and he's been performing in office okay, as long as he keeps crime under control, which so far, albeit it's only been 4 months in cold weather, but he's been doing. As long as there is no fiscal crisis, which is a big if. We've gone a long time without just a regular cyclical recession. And as long as he doesn't pick too many fights with the governor, who is going to challenge him in 3 years? Someone could challenge him from the left, but many DSA people have proven not to be very charismatic. They can only win in low turnout legislative or city council elections. They cannot win.
Which is why the point that Keith made, that he's fortunate to have Cuomo against him.
Yes.
Not only that,
Yeah.
but the DSA, there's no way Mamdani would have won unless he had Democratic support. Right? Unless he had Democratic support. Who has the upper hand? I mean, and one could argue, since the governor's running, that Mamdani would have the upper hand, because whenever somebody's running, you can always hold them hostage.
Right,
You know, you can always hold them hostage. But I think you're absolutely right, Nicole, that as long as he doesn't get crazy, and I think, I mean, what's the first thing they tell you in politics? At least they told me, you have to learn to work with the devil when you have to, right? Not that they think each other is the devil, but I mean, they know that if the state does better, if the city does better, they do better. All right, so you know, that's really what it is. I don't know if anybody has the upper hand or not, but certainly it's advantageous for the governor to work with the mayor, and it's advantageous for the mayor to work with the governor.
And it's advantageous, for us as
right,
citizens
exactly,
when those two work together.
Exactly. But I think you're absolutely right. Then the DSA won't. I mean, local low turnout, they do fine at, but on the high turnout stuff, they can't do it unless they have help.
Yeah, if someone challenges from the left and says, oh, he didn't raise taxes by $9 billion, as long as things are kind of going all right and people have some extra childcare resources, no one's going to sit around with a checklist and say he promised this and that and he didn't do it. As long as he maintains a good personality, he's doing okay. People are very generous with their...
But he's also a master communicator.
Yeah.
He's a master communicator.
Yeah, but he's
you communicate your message.
But he's also about to get a cat, so he's going to learn that he's
going to get a cat.
Really,
yeah, but he can't talk to the cat.
Really in charge.
Yeah, I understand.
Yes, you can tell us your name and your campus.
My name is Marcus Kahn, and I'm from the City College of New York. My question pertains...
As a Brooklyn College guy, I'm still going to let you ask a question.
City College, CCNY. Don't start, Bob.
So my question pertains to our earlier conversation about Mamdani only endorsing candidates who align with his political agenda. And so I was just curious about your guys' thoughts on how the New York City congressional elections play into a larger United States congressional election of people stopping or not being complicit and more going into a more progressive and socialist agenda and policies.
Well, those are two different things. When you say progressive and socialist, those are not the same things. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me. I mean, do you see them as the same, or
I mean, they're being treated as the same thing in New York City,
right?
And so here it's being treated as the exact same thing.
The socialists, I think, are going to do very well. And I brought up Brad Lander and Dan Goldman before, where Lander is challenging a sitting congressman, I think is the favorite to win the race because of some of the, actually, I think, confusions that came up in that question. So Goldman was one of the guys who was prosecuted Trump, during his second impeachment. And there's sort of this idea, that's not enough resistance, that's complicit in some ways. And I think a lot of this, to go back to Cuomo and Mamdani for 1 second, is Cuomo came in with the politics of gritted teeth and austerity and fear. And it's like, we can have this much but not more. If you don't want everything to collapse, you got to go with me. And Mamdani was offering a different and sort of brighter vision. These socialists who are running now against perfectly normal Democrats who have solid progressive values and are playing the position they're in, they're saying that's not good enough. We can have more. We need to do this now. It's not entirely clear what that means, but I think it's a winning messaging play in a lot of these contests. And amid all these built-up frustrations.
Yeah, but I think it's also the case, and I want to get one more question in, that the question reflects the fact that you have the lunatic fringe on the Republican side, New York Republicans used to be very rational Republicans.
They call them Rockefeller Republicans, right?
And Democrats, you now have this, socialist, progressive, whatever you want. I mean, I guess Michigan would be the best example of a Senate race. We have a strong leftist candidate who can probably win the primary, but probably can't win the general. And it's that fight within the Democratic Party that is, the counterpoint to what's been going on in the Republican Party. Just briefly.
Listen, every party has their factions and their factions. I remember when the Tea Party was
yeah, but you haven't had Democrats.
They were they were tearing the Republican Party apart. But they've kind of gone by the wayside now, right? The Tea Party, I don't even know. So we all have their factions, and each party goes as it gets. But hopefully, the ultimate aim is if they can come together when it counts.
Well, but isn't that...
That's the aim, yeah.
You can't do $64,000 question after inflation. The $64 million question, I don't know. Yes, ma'am. Name and campus, please.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne, and I represent Lehman College as also. So to go back to previous conversations, Nicole brought up, Mamdani would be quote unquote forgiven in a sense if he doesn't, fulfill all his promises that were made. And when it comes to Mamdani's campaign, he ran on low income, he was partying towards low income, middle income, people of that sort. So I wanted to know your guys' opinion on what if he doesn't fall through? I mean, especially in New York, people have gone so much with Cuomo, Eric Adams, everyone who is kind of on letdown on a part. So it's will Mamdani be the third? You could also only have so many chances, to let down the New York people. So I was wondering your guys' opinion on that. Would Mamdani be the third? Would he be the final?
If the Knicks don't win the championship, will the coach go?
Well, the question is there, to the degree that anybody comes into office as part of an era of good feelings, is there an expiration date on that?
It's an expiration date on every person that's in elective office. And as I use the analogy, if the Knicks don't at least get to and they play tonight, by the way, I don't know where.
Well, tonight we're taping this.
We're taping, yeah,
right,
anyway.
So
if the Knicks don't reach the championship, do they fire the coach? Right? So if Mandami doesn't
bigger question for the Mets, but that's okay.
Yeah, I didn't mention Mets. But if Mandami doesn't fulfill his promises, number one, does his own constituency turn upon him? Which they might because they're very idealistic. And number two, does the greater population turn on them as well? And it depends on the candidate that's going to run against them.
I mean, go ahead. You're going to... No, I mean, I think that also it's... he also, to the degree that the DSA has been playing some identity politics, we're taping this the day of the special election in the city council in Greenwich Village, so we don't know what the returns are. But that's been a traditionally LGBTQ seat, and Mamdani is backing a woman who is a latecomer to the DSA. And so there's, identity politics is a very confusing, and it's hard to, I think it's hard to fit identity politics cleanly into a socialist perspective. So.
And she won't win. I mean, I'm very confident, and I know this will air after the election results. Carl Wilson is going to win, but Mamdani doesn't mind that his candidate is not going to win because he knows that no one is paying attention. And I think that's another important distinction, that many of the things that people who really care about politics and policy talk about, the average voter is just not paying attention at all.
Well, we don't have lives.
Yeah, and it kind of
it
kind of goes back to the question of how much will his voters forgive him if he delivers on child care, where he promised free child care for every child aged 6 weeks to 4 years old, as long as he's got the 3-year-olds and the 2-year-olds. That's a lot of help for a lot of parents and grandparents. So people will really like that when they go to the polls. And as long as he gets some portion of the rent freeze that he promised. Now that creates a lot of policy difficulties, but a lot of swing voters who are not DSA people voted for him for the rent freeze, and they will know, does the rent go up or not?
Let me try to get one more question in quickly, please.
So I'll try to make this a quick one. Earl Johnson again, BMCC. I just wanted to ask, I guess, how do you think things play out as far as, like, we're also in a climate right now of seeing a lot of civil unrest across the nation, where, like, in other states, people have, like, I think maybe one of them was in New York too. People have, like, started to kind of lash out at work, and, like, people are like
Especially,
burning down warehouses
you know,
and things like that.
to me, this is an immigration question, and what happened in Minneapolis, what's happening now with the move to suspend temporary protective status for Haitians in particular in this city, the attempt to do away with birthright citizenship and to strip naturalized citizens of their citizenship, you know, is a recipe for a great deal more unrest. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that.
To what Nicole was saying about the bottom line things Mamdani needs to do to coast a re-election, which I think are right on, civil unrest is very complicated with him in that he is very supportive of a lot of really disruptive protests that he thinks are righteous, and handling that and like the level of protest here in a way that speaks to New Yorkers, I think is going to be a really interesting thing to watch over the next 18 months.
Having said that, you know, one of the flashpoints now is, you know, Mamdani's indicated he's going to be vetoing a bill that would allow the police to ban protesting right near educational institutions. So it's
Religious institutions, right?
He's letting that one return to law because it passed with a veto-proof majority.
well, the first one did in terms of
the one-
religious institutions was veto-proof, but not the one
Not
with
the
schools.
educational.
So we've only got 10 seconds left. I always make deadline, and Harry will know that from my past life. Thank you all. This was good. We're gonna, you know, politics never ends. We'll be back at this.
Let's do it again.
Thank you, Bob.
Do it again. Thank you.